Hi, subscribe to Life Stories so you don't miss new stories. For our truly supportive audience, it's time to start today's story. Today's story is about a husband who was just living his life oblivious to any warning signs when it happened. It was a life-changing event. Okay, let's go to the story and see what happened there. There's a saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I believe it's true. I have always tried to do what is right. I have always lived by the golden rule. Treat people how you want to be treated. Those are my words to live by. So, I have tried my best to live that way. Why is living a good life so hard? I have never wronged anyone. I never say mean words to anyone. If they're wrong, I present the facts to them in a pleasant way. When I'm wrong, I admit it. In other words, when faced with a problem, I take the high road. I was just living my life, oblivious to any warning signs when it happened. I had just come home from a 2-day conference in Texas when my wife Casey blindsided me. Our kids were sitting around the kitchen table, laughing and joking. When I asked what was so funny, the mood changed. Casey didn't ask. She told me, "Billy, why don't you take a seat?" I sat down and she waved a set of papers in my face. "Billy, take these and read them. I'm not asking for anything but the house. There are also adoption papers in there. I want Jeff to adopt the kids. I know you'll want the best for them, so just sign it. And we'll move on," Casey informed me, cool as a cucumber. My wife of 12 years had just presented me with divorce papers and adoption forms for our 3 kids. My son Devin looked at me with a smirk on his face. Devin was 10 years old. Joy, my daughter, didn't even bother to look at me. She was 9 and too busy listening to her iPod to care about losing her father. Patrick, my 7-year-old, was the only one who had anything to say. "Daddy, Jeff has a big house and we like him," Patrick explained, as if that would somehow make everything better. I just sat there, looking at Casey and the kids as if they were crazy. I thought, maybe she's high or drunk. Nah, I don't smell any alcohol on her breath. So where is this divorce coming from? Casey finally dropped the papers on the counter and handed me a check for half of the money in our bank accounts. "Kids, take your dad's bags to his truck," demanded Casey. Unbelievable. They had packed my bags before I even got home, and then waited for the perfect moment to strike. "Casey, do you think I'm going somewhere?" I asked with a slightly menacing tone. "You're moving out, Bill. Haven't you been listening?" replied Casey. "Casey, this is my family's house. My parents told me I could live here long before we got married. I don't recall your name being on anything tied to this house. I don't know what has happened to make you want a divorce, but you're never going to take my parents' house. You can leave, but I'm staying in this house," I shouted. Casey rolled her eyes and, realizing that she couldn't win that argument, changed her plans and yelled at the kids to pack their bags. They would have to change their plans and go to Jeff's house. "Casey, who the duck is Jeff?" I finally had the chance to ask. "Billy, Jeff is the man who has been sleeping with me while you are at work," said Casey. She showed no remorse or guilt. Instead, she displayed nothing but disrespect and contempt towards me. I looked to my children for support. My daughter simply told her brothers to hurry up. "That's right," my daughter said. "Jeff can give us a better life. Besides, Mom loves him and so do we." My sons nodded in agreement. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it. They all headed towards Casey's car. "Casey, don't touch that car. I pay for it, and it's in my name. Duck, you call yours Hall and tell him to pick all you sorry duckers up." Casey and the kids looked back at me, and all of them, including the kids, flipped me the bird. I was beyond angry. I had worked for this family, and they had thrown me away for someone else. I did what any normal man would do. I got stinking drunk for the first time in my life. I hated someone. I hated this Jeff guy with a passion, but more than him, I hated my family. I realized that it wasn't all him. My so-called family had chosen to betray me once. The next morning, I sobered up, cleaned myself up, and went online to find a lawyer. I made an appointment for the next day at noon. They loved him so much, I figured I'll give them what they asked for. My attorney reviewed the agreement and told me to sign it before Casey changed her mind. I signed it and my lawyer sent it back. Casey didn't even ask for child support. In the blink of an eye, with the stroke of a pen, I no longer had a wife or kids. My family had discarded me like some day-old bread. So much for staying together until the kids leave, or growing old together. 6 months later, the divorce became final. Everything changes with time, and so did I. I threw myself into my work. I went back to college and earned my master's degree, then a PhD. I was now Dr. Billy PhD CPA. I know most people find accounting to be boring, but then again, so was my life. Somehow, accounting was just my style. I decided to open my own office. It was a boutique operation that provided personalized attention to high-net-worth clients. My client base started to grow by word of mouth. By the end of my second year in practice, I had built a very nice nest egg. I also met a wonderful woman named Patty. Patty was everything I looked for in a woman. She was a hard worker, enjoyed the same things I did, and was a homebody. Patty was a little taller than Casey, but she had curves in all the right places. By the end of the 4th year, my firm had grown to the point where we needed more space. Instead of continuing to rent from someone else, I bought a 5-story office building. Patty and I loved our new building so much that we got married on the 4th floor. It was a small yet festive event. I must have enjoyed myself a little too much, because a few months later, Patty turned up pregnant. I would have loved a little more alone time with my wife. My life had really been looking up over the last 6 or so years. Needless to say, it was a surprise, no, a shock, when I was served with child support papers. Casey was asking for $3,000 a month and $432,000 in back child support. I started laughing. I hadn't seen or heard from them in 7 years, and the first thing they wanted was money. I gave the papers to my attorney. He looked at them, and when he finished laughing, he picked up the phone and called Casey's attorney. Casey, it seems, was broken alone. She had heard through the grapevine that I had become a very successful business owner. To her great disappointment, she had also found out that I had remarried, and that my wife and I had a child and another on the way. Casey's husband, Jeff, didn't mind sleeping with Casey, but married life didn't enthuse him, and one day, he just disappeared. A week later, Casey was served with divorce papers. Jeff refused to pay child support. He found a way to get the adoptions declared void. He convinced a judge that he was coerced into signing them by Casey. Jeff told the judge that Casey gave him an ultimatum: sign the adoption forms or lose everything. With their divorce final and all of the money gone, it seemed that I was Casey's next option. Casey's approach was to get my parents involved. Casey had stayed in touch with my parents ever since she left me. My parents wanted to be a part of Casey's kids' lives. They never told me anything about staying in contact with her. Casey played the part of the broken wife who had made a stupid mistake. My parents ate it up, hook, line, and sinker. They sided with her on all accounts. My dad was the first one to come see me. He talked to me about forgiveness and doing the right thing. How, if it were him, he would try to find a way to put the family back together. Somewhere in all of his ranting, I pointed out that I had remarried and had my own family. I tried to remind him how Casey and the kids had left me. My father told me to man up and fix my marriage to Casey. Patty will be fine. She can start over. I'll just have to take care of the kids and pay my child support, he said. I looked at my dad like he was crazy. For the first time in my life, I lost respect for him. I asked him to leave. My mom was next. She came in with the same request. If I didn't take Casey back, then I could move out of the house, and they would give it to Casey. I couldn't believe that these were my parents. My firm was doing great, so I went out and bought my own house. It was a week after my parents' rant that I received an eviction notice, giving me 30 days to move out. I didn't mind because the sale on my new house was closing the next day. Amazingly, when you pay cash, people will bend over backward to get things done. My parents came to the house the next week, only to find it empty. Casey and her kids moved in the next day. It's been 2 years since then, and I haven't spoken to my parents. Casey or her kids. During that time, Patty and I have 4 kids, and our firm is doing great. This year, I won the Businessman of the Year award for our area. There was a really nice picture of me and my family in the local paper. I accepted the award with pride and gave most of the credit to Patty. Without my wife Patty, I told the audience there would be no award for me. My wife is my rock. While I was giving my speech, Casey walked right up to the stage and called me a deadbeat dad. She told everyone that I ran out on my kids and her. Casey claimed that it was Patty who ruined our marriage. I think my attorney must have been prepared for this. Somehow, he had an inkling that Casey was going to use this occasion to strike at me while getting her phony story some publicity. He aimed a remote at a projector located at the side of the hall. Private investigators can be really resourceful at finding out the truth from darkness, and the technology they use is amazing. What started showing on the blank wall was a film of Casey and her attorney talking in the parking lot outside his office about getting the adoption papers that I had signed revoked. She was telling her lawyer that if he got the court to void them, what she had given him that afternoon wouldn't even compare to what he would get when they were thrown out. They also discussed how to arrange for Patty to be drugged and raped, and how they would send me the video to show me that Patty was cheating on me. Then Casey would come in and put my heart back together. She also told him how she manipulated my parents to be her puppets, or they wouldn't get to see the grandkids. When the short video finished, Casey's attorney tried to quietly leave out a side door. He was stopped by the chief of police. It seems that a few judges in the audience took an interest in the tape. I looked at my parents, then I walked over to my wife and kids, helped them with their coats, and left outside. I kissed Patty and we headed for the car. Just as I finished putting the kids in the car, my parents called my name. I got in my car without looking back and drove away. I didn't see them again until I was called to court to testify against Casey and her lawyer. I gave my testimony and headed out of the courtroom. My father was waiting outside. "Billy, I can't begin to tell you how sorry your mother and I are, but please, son, give us a chance to try and make this up." Casey was given 3 months jail time and 4 years probation. Her attorney was disbarred for conspiracy to commit fraud against the court. The Department of Child Welfare informed me that the kids would be sent to foster care if my parents or I didn't take them. I told my parents to take them. My dad told me I would have to forgive them all someday. My dad asked if wanting to be part of the grandkids' lives was so bad. We're old, son. We were going to miss most of their lives. You just gave up and moved on. What about us, Billy? Are you so heartless that you can't see she made a mistake? I explained, no, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be in their lives, but Casey didn't make a mistake. Casey was a cold-hearted woman who manipulated and lied to everyone around her. The woman got what she deserved. As for the kids, they chose him. You used to tell me that there are some things in life that can't be forgiven. Remember that. You also told me that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Then you turned your back on me. The thing is, Casey lied, cheated, and turned the kids against me, and after all that, you still sided with her against me. Now you want me to act as if nothing has changed. You're old enough to know you made the wrong choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. That was 10 years ago. Casey never learned her lesson. She got married again and tried two-timing her husband the way she had done to me. That didn't turn out so well. He caught Casey with her lover and kicked them both out. My kids with Casey are grown and living as they were raised. Devin and Patrick are in prison. As for Joy, well, before anything bad happened, she came to our house and begged to be part of our family. Patty insisted that Joy had been misled by her mother, and we should take her in and help her to lead a moral and productive life. My parents did get to meet my kids before they died. They left everything to my judgment, but asked me to make a fair allocation of their assets to all 7 of their grandchildren in my will. As for Patty and me, we'll be empty nesters soon, and I love every minute of having my wife back, all for myself. To handle such a situation effectively, it's vital to have courage, honesty, and open communication. Avoiding the urge to react with anger or dishonesty is key, as it only makes matters worse. Rebuilding trust after infidelity is tough but achievable. It calls for patience, forgiveness, and if necessary, seeking professional help. Both partners need to recognize the underlying issues that led to the infidelity and collaborate to mend the wounds. Dealing with infidelity in a relationship requires a deep understanding of its complexities. It's a sensitive topic that warrants empathy, understanding, and support. For those who face the aftermath of their partner's infidelity, remember that healing and growth are possible with dedication from both parties. Story 2. My wife and I were married for about 4 years before our divorce. I thought we were madly in love with each other. She was my favorite person, my best friend, and the love of my life. I don't understand how things turned out the way they did, but I'm trying to work through them as best as I can. When we met, we fell hard and fast for each other. A mutual friend introduced us because they thought we would have a lot to talk about. We ended up leaving the party we were at that night together, and we barely spent a day apart since. I'd never been able to picture a future with a woman until I met her. She completely changed how I felt about love and relationships. We got married after 2 years of being together, and it was all picture perfect. My wife was always somewhat of a flirt. It bothered me when we were together, but I convinced myself that it was just her being friendly with people. I figured that, as long as she was coming home to me at the end of the day, it wasn't that big of a deal. I've dated a lot of women. I have dated many women. But one of my fatal flaws as a bachelor was how clueless I was when women were showing interest in me. My friends would often point out when a woman was flirting with me, but I would be completely oblivious. One night, I invited a coworker over for dinner, and my wife noticed how she was acting towards me. This led to a conversation where my wife expressed her concerns about the coworker's interest in me and our relationship. I reassured her that she was the only woman for me and that I had not even noticed the coworker's advances. However, my wife needed proof, and we had a long discussion about boundaries and the ability to look through each other's phones if necessary. I gave her my information, and she looked through my text messages with the coworker, finding nothing suspicious. In return, she gave me her cell phone information, and I briefly looked through her phone, but I did not find anything concerning. At one point, my wife started spending a lot of time at work, after hours. I did not question it, because I knew she was working hard to get a promotion. The competition was tough, so she needed to put in extra effort. She would come home exhausted and immediately take a shower before going to bed. She never wanted to talk about work, and I assumed it was because she was stressed and tired. This went on for about 3 weeks until she came home one evening, furious because she did not get the promotion. She kept ranting about how hard she had worked and how she was doing things that no one else was doing, because she wanted the promotion so badly. She made it seem like there was a boys' club at the office, and the only reason she did not get the promotion was because she was a woman. I was angry on her behalf. I knew she was intelligent and dedicated to her job, and if she was not promoted because of her gender, it was not only unfair but also illegal. I encouraged her to quit and find a workplace where she would be appreciated. After a few weeks, things went back to normal with my wife. She was still disappointed about not getting the promotion, but she went back to work as usual. One afternoon, while I was working from home, I received an Amber Alert notification on my phone. It startled me, so I quickly swiped it away to silence the sound. However, I could still hear the alert coming from somewhere under my bed. I was confused and started searching through the bags and storage containers under the bed to find the source. I found an old tote bag hidden in a plastic container with a cheap cell phone inside. It was turned on and had about half of its battery life left. I dismissed the Amber Alert and looked at the phone, wondering why it was there. My wife and I shared a phone plan, and I knew she had an iPhone, not a cheap plastic phone. At first, I thought it might be an old phone of hers, but that did not explain why it was on and had battery life. I unlocked it and quickly looked through it to see what was going on. On with this phone. I could see that it was on silent mode, so if it weren't for the Amber Alert, I wouldn't have even known it was there. Aside from a few missed calls from toll-free numbers, there was only one number that was frequently called and texted. I recognized the name right away. It was one of my wife's coworkers. Let's call him Chris. We would often invite Chris and his wife over for dinner and go on double dates with them. They had their first baby on the way, and everything seemed perfect. I took a deep breath and looked through the messages. It was clear they were having an affair. They had been exchanging pictures and talking about what they would do when they could be alone. There were messages where Chris told my wife that he was thinking about her while he was sleeping with his wife. My wife would reply by sending him a topless picture or something similar. They made plans to stay late at work and meet with each other. As I scrolled through the messages, I realized that my wife was not trying to get a promotion, but had come up with an elaborate cover story for what she was really doing after work. I was heartbroken by what I found. My wife was the woman of my dreams, and I was over the moon to be with her. Finding out that she was cheating on me was devastating. I almost wanted to put the phone back and pretend like I hadn't found anything out, but I knew I couldn't do that. How was I supposed to look at her the same way after I knew what she had done? I knew I would have to divorce her, and the idea of that was heart-wrenching. I got back to my computer and immediately started looking up information about divorce. While I was doing that, my wife texted me and told me that she would be staying late at work again because she needed to prepare for a meeting the next day. After what I had seen, I knew it was a lie. I hadn't been angry up until that point. I was sad and defeated. But when she lied to me again and I knew what was really happening, I was furious. I thought over what I wanted to do for a few minutes before an idea struck me. I called Chris's wife and asked her if they wanted to come over for dinner that night. She told me it sounded great, but Chris was staying late at work. I told her we would schedule it for another time and hung up. About 10 minutes later, I texted her and told her that my wife was staying late too. I suggested that we be supportive, caring partners, and grab some takeout and bring it to them. She was all for that idea. We met up around 5:30, went to get some Chinese food, and drove together to the office where our partners worked. I knew that we would likely be walking in on both of them having sex, and I was nervous to see it. I started to feel bad that I had involved Chris's wife in all of this. She certainly didn't need to see what was about to happen. Unfortunately, it was too late to go back. We arrived at their office about 45 minutes after everyone would have normally left for the day. There were a couple of cars in the parking lot. One of them I recognized right away as my wife's. Both of us went inside and took the elevator up to the office where our partners worked. When the elevator door opened, we could hear the sounds of people having sex. They weren't really making much of an effort to hide what they were doing. I was surprised. I was surprised that Chris's wife immediately dropped the food on the ground and stormed through the office to see what was happening. I let her lead the way, and she brought us to a small conference room where both of our partners were completely naked and on the floor having sex. She slammed the door open and walked over to her husband, pulling him off my wife by his hair. Chris saw her and started immediately trying to apologize and explain what was happening. My wife immediately stood up and tried to get dressed. I didn't say anything. Instead, I just turned around and walked away. I knew exactly what I was going to be walking into, but part of me wished that I had hallucinated everything or something like that. My wife got dressed and followed me out of the office, begging me to stop and listen to her. I stopped, and I gave her a moment to try and explain what was happening. She told me that they had been working late at the office one night, and it just happened. They were just having sex, and that was all there was. She told me that she still loved me more than anything in the world and didn't want to lose me, but she wasn't happy with monogamy. I didn't want to listen to what she was saying, so I just left. I waited by the car for Chris's wife so we could leave together. She was extremely upset when she got in and was just crying about how he was the one who wanted a baby, and that was how he was going to act after she was pregnant. I felt even worse for her than I did for myself. As she was talking, I finally got home after dropping her off, and I packed a bag for myself to go stay at a hotel. I couldn't stand to be around my wife after that. I contacted a divorce attorney, and we got the paperwork ready to be filed. As soon as it was ready, I gave it to her. She tried as hard as she could to convince me and pursue an ethically non-monogamous lifestyle with her. She told me that would mean I could sleep with other women, like that was an incentive for me to forgive everything she had done. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be with other women. I wanted to be with my wife, who I thought I loved. We ended up getting divorced, and I was awarded our house. I didn't want to live in the house that I shared so many memories with her in, so I ended up selling it. Chris and his wife also divorced. Their divorce was a lot messier than ours, because there was a child in the picture and they had to go through custody battles. The wife was awarded full custody of their child and she got to keep their house. Plus, he had to pay her spousal support and child support. On top of that, they were both let go from their jobs after I informed their employer that they were staying late at work to have sex in the office. I haven't spoken to my wife since the divorce, so I don't know if she's found another job or if she is still looking. All I know is that she's not going to be able to use her previous job as a reference because of how she was terminated. Unfortunately, this story is full of pain, betrayal, and complex emotional experiences. It's an example of how trust can be shattered due to a partner's infidelity and how it can deeply impact the lives of all involved parties. Story 3. My girlfriend and I both met during our freshman orientation at our university. There was a week-long event for first-year students, and she and I were in the same orientation group. My girlfriend and I just clicked, and we spent a lot of time together. There was a dance for the freshmen at the end of the orientation week, and I went with her as my date. We actually both ended up losing our virginity to each other later that night. Looking back, it was really embarrassing, but it was also pretty sweet. We dated for 2 years while we were in college, and I really loved her. Neither of us was in a place to even think about getting married or starting a life together, but we were comfortable with each other. Our university had a vibrant Greek life scene. I have always thought fraternities and sororities were weird, so I had absolutely no intention of joining one. My girlfriend, on the other hand, had been dreaming about joining a specific sorority for years. When she picked out which college she was going to, she knew that she wanted to rush that sorority as soon as she had the chance. During the summer between the first and second year, she rushed the sorority that she wanted and ended up getting in. I was happy for her because I knew it was something that she had really been looking forward to, but I was a little uneasy about the idea of it. This specific sorority was a prime example of why I hated them. Everyone there was like a clone of the others. Her schedule was always so full of things she was doing with the sorority, and her coursework that I rarely got to see her. She was always going to parties, fundraisers, and campus events that the sorority had planned. I felt like I was getting left behind in some ways. Before we would talk every day, but after she joined, we barely even texted each other. We finally got together one day for lunch, and I addressed my concerns to her. She told me that it was only temporary and that as soon as she was fully settled in the sorority, things would get back to normal. The last thing she wanted was to break up with me, she said. During that lunch, she started telling me about some of the crazy rules that the sorority had. They expected their sorority sisters to behave in a way that positively represented the sorority to prospective members. That meant their dress had to be a certain way. They couldn't go out with certain kinds of men, and they needed to uphold the values of the sorority at all times. Several weeks went by and things between my girlfriend and me weren't improving. I still cared for her, and I wanted to be with her, but there was so much distance between us just because she joined that sorority. I didn't want to be the person to tell her not to join or give her an ultimatum, but it was very stressful for me. She texted me one night and invited me to a big fraternity party that was held annually. Again, I can't stress this enough. I hate Greek life, and I had no desire to go to that party. However, I wanted to see my girlfriend. I had a work study on campus to help with some events that went on for the undergrads on the weekends. So I told her that I would be there if I could get out of work early. At the beginning of the night, it really wasn't looking like I was going to be able to. So I texted my girlfriend and told her that. However, the movie that I was screening for the students was not very good, and a lot of people were leaving early. I was able to leave work early and meet my girlfriend at the party. I ended up walking out before it was over. I was able to end my shift very early and I figured I would go and see my girlfriend at the party. It was very crowded when I got there, and I didn't really know what to do. I didn't know anybody at the party, and I was just looking for my girlfriend. I recognized a couple of the other girls from her sorority, but I didn't feel very comfortable going up to them to talk. I walked around the fraternity house and looked for my girlfriend. I made it to the top floor where there were a few bedrooms. I opened a couple of doors and peeked inside to see if she was there. I was really hoping that she wasn't, because the idea of her being in a bedroom in a frat house made me very nervous. I really liked her, and I didn't want to get my heart broken over what might be happening behind those closed doors. Unfortunately, it was exactly what I was afraid of. I opened one of the doors and found my girlfriend kissing one guy with another guy behind her, kissing her neck. She was topless, and they were all three clearly about to have sex. I just stood there for a minute in shock as I watched the guy behind my girlfriend actually see me and yell at me to get out. That's when my girlfriend opened her eyes and looked at me and rushed to the door to talk to me. I just slammed the door shut in her face and made my way out of the frat house to go back to my room. She was blowing up my phone and trying to get through to me, but I didn't respond. I was hurt by what I saw. Part of me had expected it when I was walking through the hallway, but I was hoping it wasn't going to be real. There'd been a lot of distance growing between us since the beginning of the semester, and I guess I knew that we weren't going to last forever. But being cheated on really hurts. In the morning, I sent her a text message and told her that I didn't want to hear any explanations from her, and that we were over. There was no excuse that she could have given me that would have made what she did okay. I blocked her number and spent a few days sulking over it before I decided to get back to my normal life. My mind kept wandering back to the code of conduct that she showed me over lunch a few weeks prior with all of the ridiculous rules. I couldn't help but think that cheating on your boyfriend and having a threesome with two frat guys would be some kind of violation of the sorority's values. I knew how much being in that sorority meant to her, and I wanted to hurt her and get revenge in some way. I ended up reaching out to the president of the sorority on Facebook and telling her exactly what happened. I didn't really think it would do anything, but if it could damage her reputation, that was enough for me. The president of the sorority just left me on red. A couple of weeks later, I got an email from my ex-girlfriend cursing me out. I guess when I told the president about what happened, she decided to tell a lot of other sorority members. Everybody had started gossiping about her and talking about what she did, and the rumors were spreading throughout the sorority. She felt so uncomfortable that she ended up leaving. She blamed me for it, and told me about a whole host of opportunities she was going to be missing out on because she was no longer in that sorority. I don't know if she thought I was going to be happy about it, but I wasn't. I didn't know if she thought I was going to feel bad about it, but I didn't. In my eyes, that was just the consequence of her actions. If she missed out on any jobs after college, it was entirely her own fault, not mine. I ended up blocking her email and not talking to her for the rest of my time in college. There was a brief incident where we were in the same class, but she dropped it after the first day. It's possible that she did it because we were in it together. Both partners experienced complex emotions and feelings in this situation. Intervening in my ex-girlfriend's life through her sorority may be seen as an attempt at revenge, but it can also lead to additional hurt and conflict. It's important to consider the emotional state of all parties involved and strive for solutions that cause less harm and promote understanding. Story 4. I am a 34-year-old male and my wife is 30 years old. We met at a wedding for a mutual friend. She was one of the bridesmaids, and I couldn't take my eyes off her throughout the ceremony. During the reception, I asked her to dance and we connected. We exchanged information and scheduled our first date for the following weekend. The time we spent together was amazing, and I'm confident in saying that I fell in love with her right then. We dated for a year and a half before we got married. It was somewhat of a whirlwind romance, and we didn't want to wait much longer. Some of our family and friends thought it might have been a little too soon, but they knew how passionate we felt about each other when we first started dating. I had an amazing job, making twice what my wife made every year with a little more to spare. We had some long conversations after we were married, and we decided it would be best for her to quit her job. She had wanted to focus on building a business of her own anyway, so we thought it would be good for her to do that, while I continued working. During the early years of our marriage, we had a lot of conversations about starting a family. It was something that I wanted to do down the line, but I wanted to spend a few years with just my wife. I wanted to travel and explore the world in my free time, and having a child was going to make that difficult. I was under the assumption that she had an IUD and things were being taken care of on her end to avoid pregnancy. So, I was very surprised when she was waiting for me at home one evening to tell me that she was pregnant. I didn't know how it happened, and she explained to me that it's possible that an IUD isn't 100% effective. It took me by surprise, and my reaction wasn't exactly what my wife was hoping for, so she was hurt that I wasn't immediately excited about it. I assured her that I was excited about having the baby, but it was just a lot sooner than I thought it would be. Everything with the pregnancy went well, and my wife gave birth to a very healthy baby girl. Our lives have been completely different ever since. I love my daughter more than anything in the world, and I would do anything for her. That being said, my wife had a funny way of reminding me how I reacted when I found out about the pregnancy. After our daughter was born, my wife put her business on the back burner to take care of our daughter. I understood her decision for a little while, but I had personally invested a lot of money in the business she wanted to start. I encouraged her to get back to it because I didn't want to lose all the money I had put into it. However, she was frustrated with me for suggesting this, as she saw herself as a full-time mother and the business was no longer a concern of hers. After some convincing, she agreed to focus on her business while taking care of our daughter. Don't get me wrong, I understood her perspective, but she had been very adamant about me investing thousands of dollars into her business before she got pregnant. Wasting all of that was not an option. For the first 3 years of our daughter's life, everything was going well. My wife was running her business, and while it wasn't the most successful, she was earning a modest income from it. My job was also going well, and we were even thinking about buying a vacation house. However, everything changed when I was unexpectedly laid off from my job. The company was going bankrupt, and they were making massive cuts. We had a decent amount in savings, and I was able to liquidate some other assets, so we could live comfortably for a while as I looked for another job. But there was a time when we were relying on my wife's business to make money, and she didn't like that at all. She was angry with me for getting laid off. I could tell that she thought I wasn't working hard enough or giving enough to the job, and that made me the reason we were going through the troubles we were. She seemed to care less about me when I wasn't bringing in all of the money for the household. During this time, I started to notice some changes in my wife's behavior. I was home all of the time, and she couldn't seem to get away from me fast enough. It seemed like the idea of being intimate with me made her angry, and she started dressing up more than usual, even for simple errands like going to the grocery store. I thought she was acting strangely, but I attributed it to the stress of adjusting to our new situation. One day she told me she was out for drinks with one of her girlfriends. I said goodbye to her that evening, and she came home drunk around midnight. When I asked her about her night, she didn't want to share much and just laughed, saying it was a secret. I assumed she was just being silly and would tell me the next day. However, when I asked her about it over breakfast, she said she hardly remembered anything. This seemed odd to me, as I didn't remember her ever being blackout drunk before. Looking back, I realized it was an excuse to avoid talking about it. As she started going out more often with her friends, I began to worry that something might be going on. I assumed she was doing it to escape the stress of our situation at home. I never thought she would be cheating. One night while she was out, I was putting our daughter to bed and noticed she had a slight fever. I knew the basics of what to do, but I couldn't find any child medicine or supplies. I tried calling and texting my wife for help, but she never answered. I understood that she was out with her friends and might not have been looking at her phone. But I was worried about what would happen in case of an emergency. I expected her to answer the phone. She came back later that night and immediately went to check on her daughter because she felt bad for not being there. She was a little bit drunk, but I tried to have a conversation with her about what was going on anyway. I expressed my concerns about her not answering her phone and going out with her friends more often. She told me it was unfair that I wanted her to just stay home and take care of the kid. She framed it as me forcing an exclusively domestic lifestyle on her when I wasn't holding up my end of the bargain. We got into a huge argument about all of that, and she basically told me that she was upset that I lost my job. Neither of us spoke to each other for a couple of days as we tried to get over what was said during the fight. During those days, she received a lot of phone calls that she would take away from me. I was curious about them, so I stood on the other end of a door and eavesdropped. She was whispering on the phone and explained to someone that she couldn't leave because her daughter was sick. But she also told them that she missed them and couldn't wait to see them again in a few days. That wasn't how she spoke to her friends. It wasn't a platonic phone call at all. I pretended like I didn't hear what happened, and later that night, I went through her phone. I saw that she had a text message exchange with a guy that she went to college with. He always had a crush on her, but she didn't reciprocate it. The guy was a highly sought-after lawyer in our area, and married. That didn't seem to matter to either of them, because they were having an affair. From what I saw in the messages, they were sending each other nude pictures and explicit messages and scheduling times to be together. I noticed from the meeting times, they set that they were all during the nights when my wife was supposedly out with her friends. The interesting part of their messages was how they all started days after I lost my job. She sent him a message asking if he knew of a good divorce attorney. He asked if everything was all right with us and wanted to help her if he could. She told him that our marriage wasn't working out and she wanted to get out before things got messy. I had no idea what she meant by that. Up until I lost my job, everything had been going great with us. I had never heard her. I hardly even raised my voice at her. So saying she was worried things would get messy was strange. From there, they started talking about their past and that she always had a thing for him. Whenever she would talk to me about him, she mentioned how pathetic his crush on her was. She made it seem like she thought she was so much better than him and wouldn't even consider being with him. Now she's telling him that she's always had a thing for him. I felt like a fool for believing what she told me. The relationship had been deteriorating before my eyes, and I was too eager to ignore the signs. Seeing how her affair started after I lost my job put a lot of things into perspective for me. When we met, she was working and had a decent job, so I never assumed that she could have been with me for the money and stability that I offered. But in hindsight, she was very quick to leave her job and convince me she was going to run a business that she practically abandoned. I gathered as much evidence from her phone as I could, and I sent it all to myself so I could give it to my divorce attorney. If she thought for 1 second she was going to be divorcing me and taking half of my assets, she had another thing coming. On top of divorcing her, I wanted to get back at her for what she did. It was clear to me that she had been using me throughout the entirety of our marriage, and I was angry. I took a little while to think about what I wanted to do, and I came up with an idea. I called the lawyer that she was having an affair with, and I had a conversation with him about wanting to sue my former employer for wrongful termination. I made it seem like there was going to be a big case that he was going to be unable to refuse. He and I were somewhat acquaintances, so I told him to bring his wife over to our house and we would have lunch together, all 4 of us. He tried to get out of it, but I insisted. Before we had our lunch meeting, I had a conversation with my wife about him coming over. I joked around with her about what she said about the lawyer in the past. She started talking about how he was in college and the weird things he was doing, all while I was recording her. She said she thought he was pathetic and didn't understand how he landed someone like his wife. It was all just very mean. The day of our lunch meeting finally came, and we all sat around on my back patio and got to talking. I casually mentioned that my wife mentioned she went to school with the lawyer. They both started talking about it fondly and reminiscing. I corrected my wife and told her that wasn't what she told me earlier. I pulled out my phone and played a recording of her calling him pathetic and an embarrassing loser. The lawyer was obviously very offended by it. Then I told him that I wished he knew how she really felt before they had an affair. That caught everybody off guard, and both of them tried to deny it. I told them there was no point in denying it. And I knew everything. I also told them that I was in contact with a divorce attorney and would be making sure my wife didn't get a thing from me. The lawyer and his wife got into an argument, and she ended up leaving by herself. My wife didn't think about coming to me to clarify what was happening. Instead, she went to the lawyer and tried to explain why she said the things that she did. He clearly didn't believe her either. He must have had some inkling of how she felt at the time, and hearing her say it finally confirmed it. I butted my head in and explained to him that she was only really with me for the money. So when I lost my job, she was probably jumping over to him so she wouldn't have to work for anything. Part of me felt bad for him because I knew that she was manipulating him. But he knowingly slept with a married woman, so he deserved whatever was going to happen to him after I kicked my wife out of the house that night. And she begged me not to because she said she didn't have anywhere else to go. She fought very hard to get a portion of my assets. It was very clear that she had one thing in mind during all of it, and that was money. In the end, she didn't get anything from me. Not long after our divorce, I actually found an incredible job as well. If she had just stuck it out for a few months, none of that would have happened, and she would have been more comfortable than she ever was. Instead, she had to be selfish and greedy and ended up losing everything. Ended up losing everything in the end? This story is full of pain and disappointment. Upon discovering his spouse's infidelity, the protagonist decides to seek revenge by exposing her to her lover. However, such actions can cause additional pain and damage not only to the marriage but also to trust and interpersonal communication. Instead, it is advisable to reflect on one's own roles and responsibilities in relationships and strive for constructive conflict resolution.